Hello guys, it's Unders and I hope the day is finding you well. So today's video we're going to have more of an in-depth look at the new synth from Loopmasters, which is Bassmaster. If you're just after a brief overview, a quick how to use, I've done a previous video and I'll link that down below and hopefully in the cards up the top. But this is going to be a real more in-depth look at exactly how it works and how you can set it up and what's going on with inside it. So this is the synth itself and there's nothing more to it than this display. So what we're going to do is just go through it from left to right, top to bottom, and just break down exactly what it is. So far left side, we've got this top layer and sub layer in this little squared out section here. Now most synths, what you'd associate this with would be your oscillator section, and that's essentially what this is. So think of it as a 2-os synth, but it's using two waveforms or two sample sets and combining those together. And it's got some of like the standard things you'd find in sort of a sampler going with it. So if we have a look at the top layer, it's got a sample start. Now what this does is it takes different point within the sample to start it from. Simple as that. So if you've got a quite percussive sound that then moves on into a more bassy tone, but you don't want that percussive element, you use the sample start to move it along so it starts in the bassy tone and cuts away the percussive element. So we can probably demonstrate that using just a little patch we've got here. If we solo Bassmaster, so actually here we've got quite this percussive distorted sound here. Hopefully we can use the sample start to perhaps take the sort of almost the attack away. See, so by changing the sample start there, we've taken that percussive element out of it, and it starts in where the sound would normally take a little bit of time to get to fully developed. So that's what your sample start is doing. Now just below that is effectively our sample choice. So if you were to think of it as an oscillator, this would be like choosing your wave type, be it a sine, square, etc. But in this case, we've got a combination of different sample sets, and they're categorized out for us in terms of high, low, mid, percussive, simple, and sub. So ideally, when you're creating these patches, we're going to want to make use of the high and mid sets on this top layer. Most of the time, you're going to want sort of a subby layer that contains a bass element, and then a more percussive, noisy layer to go on top. And they're all contained within high and mid, as well as some obviously in percussive. That's what we're using in this instance, but it does still have a lot of bass tone to it. So just to give an example of that. So notice everything in high tends to be quite noisy and buzzy, whereas if we were to take a sub patch, for example, a lot less prominent high tones going on. We can also make use of mid as well. You're completely free to put any set of sounds in, but while doing some basic design, I would recommend using something from high and something from sub in the sub layer to help you build a sound easily that's definitely not going to cause any conflicts. Much easier to control, whereas if you were to take two sounds from high, got lots of pops and clicks and there's some phasing going on. It might be the effect that you're after, but it's just generally a good way to build and stack your sound by having a sub layer and a high layer and mix and blend the two. And it's designed that way to work that way. So as you'll notice, the sub layer also has an octave change as well. So if we put another sub sound in here, we've now got this. We can switch the trigger point of the sub either up an octave or down an octave to where our main rhythms being triggered. Now, this is useful because this melody here, for example, if we say wanted to trigger it up 1 octave and get a more buzzy sound out of our synth, that's great, but we've lost all of the sub element to it. So using this octave drop down here, we could now drop it back down to the octave it was at. And that helps us maintain the sub element to it as well. Okay, so if we move just a little over to the right, you'll see at the top section we've got a full ADSR. So that's our attack, decay, sustain and release. And this is the envelope and it only applies to the top layer. So if we push the attack up, it will take a long time for the top layer sound to come into effect. So you hear how the note has to almost fully develop before we get any of that. And on the shorter notes, it doesn't reach us at all. If we bring it down, it's then always present. Now the decay is just how long it stays at 100%. So attack, it brings itself up to full volume. Decay is how long it takes to then reduce down from that. If we have a really long decay, it will last for a full 4 seconds, and really short, all the way down at 0 milliseconds there. Now the sustain, we can put that all the way up and it will remain at 0 decibels. Or if we say bring it down here by 5 dB, and if we put the decay up to this 30 here, this now means that it will take 30 seconds to decay 5 decibel, the decay and sustain working together. And then when the note has finally been released, so the note in here comes to an end. So the note here comes to an end. This is the release and how long that will take, and that's 0.19 seconds on the top release there. On the sub layer, we just have the attack and release options. So the sustain and decay is auto managed and always remains at 100%. So we basically get to bring the sound in and bring the sound out. So moving over to the right ever so slightly, there's a different colored panel. And this is just a mixer between our top and sub section. And it's just so we can balance the two out. We can adjust to taste and we can automate and adjust the balance that way as well, which is really useful. There's also a direct out, and the direct out is only on the sub, and it means it'll avoid the filters and it'll avoid the layer effects, and it will go directly out, just the sample set as it is. You may want this, you may not. Completely depends on your sound design. Okay, moving over to the next darker blue section is the filter section. There's quite a bit going on in here, so I'll explain what's going on. Firstly, we've got this little orange switch here, and this is our key tracking. I know it appears like it's enabling the filter, but it's actually enabling key track. Just below is pre-drive. Now what pre-drive does is it pre-distorts the sound before it goes into the filter. So pushing up the pre-drive will add more harmonics to the sound. So if we take our filter off completely, and we're going to put that all the way up to 25 kilohertz there, which does turn the filter off. So pre-drive adds a lot of harmonic. Now we have cutoff, and just above we have a menu, and we've got a whole list of filters in here. Now you'll notice some of them are named similarly with LDR at the end. LDR refers to a ladder filter. Now without getting into the complexities of ladder filters, essentially think of any Moog synth or Moog emulator. They make use of ladder filters, and that is that particular sound. They add a further distortion by being run through a ladder filter, especially when applying resonance. So we've got our low pass with a 6 dB slope, low pass with a 12 dB slope. We've got an 18 dB slope ladder filter, and then we've also got the 24s. Then we've got a band pass with 6 dB slope and high pass at 6 and 12, as well as a comb filter. In this particular patch, we're making use of the low pass 24 slope ladder filter. Now our sound's changed a lot because we've pushed the pre-drive up and we've got lots of extra harmonics, but that can serve as well to show how the resonance really affects the cutoff with the ladder filter. If I was to switch to the same slope of the non-ladder filter, we get a very different sound. So the resonance with the ladders distorts a lot more and gives us a very different sound. So it's quite useful for this kind of design. So next up here, we've got an amount slider that connects to another set of ADSRs. This is our envelope for the filter. So the filter can work on its own envelope. So exactly the same as how our sample set here works. We've got an attack with our decay, sustain and release, but the amount applies to the cutoff on the filter. So we could dial this back and we'd stop getting that squelchy introduction. Where I had it at around 50% before, that's what gives us that squelchy feeling each time a note hits, because this filter is taking effect on the cutoff and it's boosting the cutoff up because the amount here is going into the positive, so it boosts the cutoff this direction, and then it decays back down over a couple of hundred milliseconds, and that gives us an extra bit of high end just for a really short moment of time. If we were to bring it into negative 50%, it would go the other way and almost mute the sound. Below we have the filter Elephone. Now this does almost the same thing as the envelope, except it's a bipolar LFO that is again linked to the cutoff of the filter. So we have an amount, we have the type of wave that is used to apply to it, and we have the rate, as well as this useful sync function here. So we can have it in 0 version of hertz all the way through to 50 hertz, or we can sync it to our track. We can also decide the phase at which point it starts. So by adjusting the phase, we can choose at what sort of cycle the LFO is going to trigger on our sound. We'll turn this off again, and we'll turn the envelope off as well. So we've got that really dull sound, and we'll introduce the LFO. So you can now hear that the LFO is causing the cutoff to move on every, because it's 1/4. If we were to move this up in time to something like 1/8, we can go much more extreme. Let's just dial this back to where we had it. Okay, so moving into the bottom section now, we've got the performance of the synth. So legato is the way it plays, or portamento. These are how the notes work with one another. So if there are overlapping notes, it will be whether both trigger or whether one slides into the other. And when we have it in legato, and we have notes that go over one each, and we have notes that go over one another, this glide function takes control, and this is the length of time it takes from one note to develop into another. Having a really long glide time will mean the note takes a very long time to develop into another note. So that's quite a quick movement. So you can hear there it's taken a lot longer to slide that note down. It's back where we were previously. It's there almost instantaneously. However, this takes a lot longer. Below where we've got Legato, we have a range selector, which is 2, and it's applying 2 semitones here. And this gives us our pitch drift, which we can use with a pitch wheel on a keyboard. And by using it, we can drift up to 2 semitones on a note. This is good for pitching down or up longer notes nice and quickly. Now below this we have this little almost boxed off section here, and these are some modulation routines that we can do, and they're bipolar amounts. They go into the positive and negative, and they can be sent through to various things. As you can see, this is going to the cutoff, this is going to the reverb send, and that's going to the top release, but there's no amount going in, and these amounts are controlled by the mod wheel here. So when this is at full, this will move just this fractional amount of 19%. They're both at 19%. And when it's down, it will be statically pointing to the top at 0. And it will work consistently in a linear fashion right the way through to 19%. So there's effectively going to be 19 values throughout that mod wheel, bringing it up to the full percentage. If we are a bit more extreme with them, we'll be able to really hear what it's doing. And that's really useful because it allows us to have almost 2 sounds set up, and we can develop the sound over time this way. Okay, so our bottom section here, we've got 3 effects, and everything runs through these unless we have used our sub direct out. We've got distortion, stereo, chorus, and a reverb send. And within each, we've got a different set of algorithms. And I don't think we need to go through each one. I think I'd leave it down to you to choose which sound is best depending on what you're working on. But if we enable the distortion, we've got drive and color, which are going to be fairly standard, and they remain the same depending on which version we've chosen. Obviously pushing drive up gives us more distortion. And the color is generally going to be the frequency area most effective. Chorus, there's a couple of different effects. We can do wide and detune, gentle chorus effect, which tends to create really subtle comb filtering, and uber. We'll leave it on widened for the minute. The amount, generally the further we push it, the wider it gets. And then the rate, we can sort of tune to whether or not we can hear it. It can be really fast and really slow. Generally, the slower it is, the less obvious it is to hear. And reverb, size of the room versus the level of how much reverb we hear. And then we've got the Master FX frequency booster. Now we've got a wet and dry slider between this, so we can do it parallel. We can have 50% in, which is absolute parallel mix. We can have 100% wet, which means everything goes through this. And it's basically 3 bands of compression, bottom, middle, and top, and how much you want, and then a master level out. So if we have it just dry. I've got relatively toned down settings, but if we max everything out, we can hear the benefit of having the wet dry. And being able to run it in parallel. Okay, and the last thing to really look at now is how that we can automate certain things. So it's quite simple. It's got a right-click interface, and if we right-click, we can do a Learn MIDI CC and connect it to a controller. Or in Logic, all but the modulation wheel are available to modulate. So if we press A, we can go into bassmaster, and we've got everything here labeled as it is on the synth for us to modulate. For example, we could take the distortion color, and we could perhaps create a bit of a talking synth sound doing it that way. If we bring this really down, be really extreme with it. And that's it. That's the real in-depth look at a bassmaster and what it can do. I suggest going and downloading the demo. It's got a 14-day free trial, and you can definitely get some great sounds out of it in that time. It's really simple to use. I'd definitely say it's a great starter synth. I hope that was helpful. Thank you very much for subscribing, guys, and I will see you on the next video.